Hello and welcome back. Please remember to complete all assignments and discussions in the module before the posted due date, and feel free to contact me with any questions. At the end of our last lecture, we left off covering different primates, specifically Hominoidea. So let's continue by going into more detail about them. Hominoids are members of the group Hominoidea. This is a group composed of different species of apes, including humans. Non-human apes are only found in Asia and in Africa. Remember that no apes are found in Europe, Australia, North or South America, or Antarctica. Humans are the only exception to this. 7 hominoid species exist. Our first 2 are very similar, so we'll discuss them together. These include gibbons and siamangs. Gibbons and siamangs are only found in Southeast Asia. They're the smallest of the apes. Therefore, they're known as lesser apes. Not lesser because they're not as good as or they're not as smart as. They're simply smaller, slightly smaller. They're still larger than most monkeys. They're just a little smaller. They are full brachiators, and they're frugivores who also eat insects, leaves, and flowers. Our next member of Hominoidea are orangutans. Orangs are members of the genus and species Pongopygmaeus. I would like you to learn the genus and species for a few of these apes. I certainly don't expect it for all of the different primates, really just a few of the apes, orangs, gorillas, chimps, and bonobos. Those are really the only 4 you need to know the species names on. For the living apes, when we get into the fossil primates, you'll need to know the fossil names. This will help you understand the relationship between different species because some of them share the same genus. Orangs are found only in Sumatra and in Borneo, so they're only found in Indonesia. They're an arboreal species that use all 4 limbs to brachiate. They have a very distinct sexual dimorphism between males and females. This means that sexual dimorphism means that you see skeletal differences, visual skeletal differences between males and females. An example of sexual dimorphism among deer could be the presence or absence of antlers. So that's what sexual dimorphism is. Among orangs, males are very large and they tend to have very broad faces. So what you see in the image on the upper right is a male. It has that big broad face. And on the lower right and on the lower left, you see females. They have more slender faces. All orangs are frugivores who also occasionally eat bark, leaves, and insects. They're highly endangered due to hunting and habitat loss. Orangs could go extinct in the wild during our lifetime. So this is one species that we really need to keep an eye on and try to reduce habitat destruction. The next species we want to discuss are gorillas. Gorillas are pretty easy to remember their genus and species, as it's simply gorilla. They are the largest living primate. They can weigh up to 400 pounds. They're found only in forested regions of equatorial Africa. They are terrestrial quadrupeds who practice knuckle walking. There are 4 subspecies that are divided between lowland and mountain gorillas. But generally, gorillas are folivores. They eat leaves, stalks, and sometimes fruit. They're highly endangered due to hunting, habitat loss, and they're caught in the middle of warfare. They could easily go extinct in the wild in our lifetime. A primatologist that I took classes from when I was an undergrad posed an ethical dilemma to us, and we thought it was just an exercise in the class, until he said, well, that's the reality. And he said, you can try to save gorillas or you can try to save orangs, but you cannot save both. Where do you begin? If you try to save both, you're going to lose both. So where do you go for conservation efforts? Which one gets the attention, gorillas or orangs? And that is a really, really tough, heartbreaking decision. Knowing that they are evolutionary cousins to us, and there have been efforts to communicate with both species. They're smart. They're very intelligent. Which do you focus your efforts on? Just a pretty sad thought there. All right, moving forward to our next group of hominoids, our next species are chimps. Most people think of chimps. Chimps are known as pan-troglodytes. Their genus is Pan, their species is Troglodytes. They're the best known primate, but they're also, unfortunately, the most misunderstood. Because of movies, circuses, and TV, people have the wrong impression of chimps, and I really hope this class helps to correct such impression. So this impression of the chimp smoking a cigarette and playing cards is really, really wrong. Instead, I would like you to think of chimps as these. They're found in equatorial Africa, and only in equatorial Africa. They practice a combination of arboreal and terrestrial lifestyles. They move around using a mix of quadrupedal knuckle walking and brachiation. They can walk bipedally, but only for very short distances. They're omnivores, consuming fruits, insects, leaves, nuts, bird eggs, and occasionally small mammals. They're very social, exhibiting complex primate behaviors, which is why we typically think of chimps when we think of other apes. They're not monkeys, they're apes. In fact, if you want to know the big secret, next time you go to the zoo and you're with your friends or your family and you want to impress them with your knowledge, there's a secret to telling the difference between chimps or between apes and monkeys, and it's pretty simple actually, but people don't realize it. If it has a tail, it's not an ape. Apes don't have tails. Monkeys have tails. Lemurs have tails. Lorises, tarsiers have tails. But if it doesn't have a tail, it's an ape. So next time you want to go to the zoo, you can easily impress people by saying, oh, well, if you look at the simple variables and other morphology, just throw in a whole bunch of terms, but really it just does have a tail or not. It's that simple. And I've done that to a lot of people before. If I'm with friends at the zoo, they're like, oh, look at the monkey. And I'm like, no, that's not a monkey, that's an ape. And they go, well, how do you know? And well, if you look at the ears and you look at the fur and the pattern on the hands, and then I just look at it, I go, no, I'm kidding. It doesn't have a tail. It's that simple. And you can do that too. You can be that person. See, you're learning. In addition to chimps, we have another ape species that's very similar. In fact, they share the same genus. So here we see bonobos. Now remember, chimps were pan-troglodytes. Bonobos are pan-peniscus. They're two different species that are a member of the same genus. That would be like us, Homo sapiens, having another species that's a member of the genus Homo. Something that hasn't happened for quite a long time. We're the last member of the genus Homo. We're not going to be the last. We may evolve, and there might be another member of the genus Homo in the future. But currently, we are the last that has survived. The others have gone extinct. So bonobos, pan-peniscus, they're similar to chimps with a few key exceptions. They're only found in a very small area south of the Zaire River. Their legs are generally longer than their arms, and their social behavior is different. Bonobos tend to be calmer than chimps. They're very, very calm. They are very methodical in their actions. You can tell that there's more thought that goes on in terms of their actions than among chimps. Chimps are kind of skittish. Unfortunately, bonobos are fairly poorly studied due to civil war in their native habitat, and not a lot of zoos like to have bonobos because bonobos have they solve tension, they relieve tension in the group by having orgies, and a lot of parents bring kids to the zoo and kids ask questions and parents are uncomfortable answering those questions. And so a lot of zoos prefer chimps over bonobos simply so they don't have to answer the questions about why the bonobos are doing what they're doing. If you do want to see bonobos, there's only a few zoos in the United States that have them. I think it's Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago has them. The Milwaukee Public Zoo has them. And I think there's a zoo in San Francisco that has them. There's not a lot that have bonobos. They aren't too different from chimps. The kids won't notice the difference. But bonobos, if you really spend some time in front of the bonobo pen, they're looking back at you. They are intelligent, very intelligent. So they really do need to be studied further. And there's been some really interesting work in terms of bonobo cognition as well as communication. All right, there's one ape that's left. We said there were 7 different apes. One ape is left, and that's us, Homo sapiens. We're the only species to practice habitual bipedalism, and biologically we are omnivores. Culturally, we may be vegetarians or vegans or otherwise. Such cultural classifications are a part of our primate behavior. So let's begin discussing primate behavior now that we're getting into that. We're going to begin with primate social organization, how primate groups are organized in the wild. We have 4 different types of primates, 4 different types of primate groups. Okay, the first is the Noyau. This is the simplest social group. It's found among primates. It's found among nocturnal primates. It's typically an individual female and her offspring. Here, adult males and females don't form permanent mixed-sex groups, and adults tend to travel alone, with the exception of the females who have their offspring, their young offspring. Individual males have ranges that tend to overlap several different female ranges. And an example of a primate that practices the Noyau would be the Ai. This is the Ai. It's a nocturnal primate in Madagascar. The second primate social group is called the territorial pair. Here we have 1 adult female, 1 adult male, and their offspring. They tend to mate for life and are highly territorial. They have highly vocal calls. They use very, very loud calls to warn others that they own a territory, they control a territory. So they are very, very loud and they're very territorial. Examples include gibbons and siamangs. Our third primate social group is the 1 male group. This is where we find a single adult male with several adult females as well as their offspring. Adult males without females form separate all-male bands or they live alone. 1 male groups are typically characterized by repeated efforts by outside males to take over. And if the resident male changes, the infant children of the former resident male will often be killed. Now this is called infanticide. Note that males never kill their own offspring, but they will kill the offspring of other males. Examples of 1 male groups include howler monkeys. If you're ever in Mexico on vacation, you might see monkeys. They've really cleaned it up a bit where they don't really let people walk around with monkeys on a chain anymore. When I first started going down there for excavations on Mayan sites, there were still a lot of people that would walk around and you could pay them a couple bucks to let the monkey hop on your shoulder and you get a photo. But they've really cracked down on that because it really is cruel. If you hear monkeys in the wild or if you see them in the wild down there, they're most likely spider monkeys. If you're there at night and you hear this low growl that just sounds like it's something out of a horror movie, that's likely a howler monkey. Howler monkeys are pretty small, but they pack a real roar. You should look that up on YouTube. It would be a really interesting thing. I mean, that's what horror movies and bad dreams are made of. And when I was working down there at night in the jungle, at night trying to sleep, the first time I heard howler monkeys, I did not know what to expect. I was expecting some really big, dangerous animal to come strolling through, the town. And no, it's just a howler monkey out in the jungle doing its territorial call or mating call. That's all. They're really cool. They're really cool. All right, our final primate social group is what we refer to as the multi-male, multi-female group. This group has complex intra-troop politics as well as competition. Here, groups tend to become very large in size with several males and many females as well as their offspring. And large groups of primates are often called a troop. A troop of primates is a large group. So here we see baboons. Baboons form large troops. Primate social groups also practice a behavior called fission-fusion. Here the social group tends to separate to fission and then periodically rejoin, fusion. Individuals then form temporary associations for various reasons. This allows larger groups to feed together in rich areas. The group as a whole tends to reunite in the ebb and flow of changing activities. For example, some chimpanzees may practice fission-fusion. Let's segue into primate social behavior. Different social behaviors reinforce the social organizations we have just discussed. Here we need to think about shaking someone's hand or salute. These social behaviors reinforce social organization. And that handshake is a social behavior that does so. It's important to remember that these social behaviors are learned. They're not biological, they are cultural. We as anthropologists study primate social behaviors to develop models of early hominid behavior. Humans are products of the same evolutionary forces that produced other species. Therefore, early hominids may have exhibited some of the same behavioral patterns that we see among living primates today. Primates practice various social behaviors for various reasons. So let's think about behavior as communication. It's very important and universal among all animals to communicate. Intentional behaviors that communicate things include gestures, facial expressions, and vocalizations. So we have dominance behaviors, which dominance behaviors can be seen as threats. This can include staring, exposing your canine teeth, bobbing back and forth, and branch shaking. If you're at the zoo, please do not exhibit dominance behaviors to the primates. They'll see you as a threat, and they're not going to hurt you because they're behind glass or they're in an enclosure, but it's just not nice. I don't know how else to put it. It's not nice. Be nice to primates. They're not that different from us. Next, we have submissive behaviors. This can include crouching and presenting hindquarters. Don't do that either. Nobody wants to see you presenting your hindquarters. Nobody wants to see you mooning the primates. That'll get you kicked out of the zoo. We also have reassuring behaviors. This can include touching, patting, hugging, holding hands, and social grooming. Social grooming is where you're picking through your neighbor's fur to clean it. They're not really fur. They don't have fur. They have hair. They're mammals. They're not like a dog. They don't have fur. They have hair. This reinforces social relationships by doing a service to your neighbor. So such behaviors are often communicated through facial expressions. Think about how we do this every day. We make different social expressions based on different emotions that we're feeling. This is common in chimps and bonobos as well as ourselves. So, for example, among non-human primates, we can see a play face or we can see the fear grin. Such behavioral displays are more complicated combinations of behaviors. This can include, for example, gorillas slapping their chest and tearing vegetation. Or for chimps, they could be shaking branches, making themselves look much more powerful and strong. Behavior is more than just visible interaction. Primate behavior can reflect complex strategies, such as primate reproductive strategies. These are strategies to produce and raise as many offspring as possible. Anthropologists call these reproductive strategies K and R selection strategies. K selection strategies are for individuals who produce very few young. Instead of producing a lot of young, there's a tremendous amount of parental care that's invested into these young. Primates are a great example of K-selected mammals. The opposite K selection. The opposite of K selection is R selection. R selection is where we have individuals that produce large numbers of offspring where there's little, if any, parental care invested in their young. Common examples include fish and rabbits. Excuse me. We need to keep in mind that primates have culture that produces sophisticated learned behaviors. Unfortunately, we often consider ourselves the only primates with quote-unquote culture. This is not the case. As we said earlier, cultural behavior is learned. Termite fishing is one example. This is where chimps will use a twig to fish termites out of a termite mound. They'll select a twig that's a specific flexibility. They'll strip all the leaves or the branches off of it. And then they'll very carefully stick that twig down into a termite mound. And the termites will attack the twig because that's what they do. They don't want the twig in there. They'll latch onto the twig. The chimp will very slowly pull the twig out. And the termites will be stuck on the twig, and it will be essentially like a termite popsicle. This is a very sophisticated learned behavior that chimps practice, and we're going to discuss other sophisticated learned behaviors in our next lecture. That's it for today. Please remember to complete all assignments and discussions before the posted due date. And as always, feel free to contact me with any questions. Thank you.